Good afternoon once again, book lovers of the internet. Welcome back to my channel. I am Book Nerd 802, and as you might know, at the moment I am studying at the University of Malta to become a teacher of English in secondary schools, and I had two exams I needed to sit for in person this semester, and I made a video about my first one already, having to do with philosophy and psychology in education. And a couple of days ago, I sat for my second examination, which consisted of 5 questions. I had an hour and 35 minutes to answer the whole thing, and this is what the exam sheet looks like. Very straightforward kind of exam sheet, although there was plenty to study. And this one had to do with assessment, with assessing students when it comes to giving them a grade, seeing their progress, and focusing on the feedback you give and acknowledging the effort they make. And this was split into an assignment and an exam as well, which was way too much work in my opinion, but I managed to get everything done on time anyway. The deadline was a few days ago for the assignment, and there were questions pertaining to formative and summative assessment. For instance, formative assessment or assessment for learning has to do with the feedback you give students throughout the whole year without giving them a grade, just giving them feedback, acknowledging what they are doing that is right, telling them what they can do that can be improved upon, whereas summative assessment has to do with giving them a grade and comparing them to other students. So you are not really acknowledging their individual ability, but rather putting them on the same framework as every other student in the country, which, or in the world even, which can be a tad demoralizing. And I do consider formative assessment to be much more valuable than summative assessment. When you just get a grade or a mark without being given any feedback, it doesn't really mean much to anyone. You are not really growing as an individual. You are not becoming a better student. You are not learning how to learn, and ultimately you are not appreciating the value of the subject you are studying. Whereas with formative assessment, if you have good teachers, you will get consistent and constant feedback. You know exactly what you are doing right and wrong. Um, you are not being compared to others. There is less stress, less anxiety, and you learn how to take charge of your own work. There is still autonomy with regard to your own studying, and you learn how to learn, so to speak. So you learn how to understand and value a topic without others having to tell you to. It no longer feels like a chore because you are doing this of your own volition. You are taking charge of your own education and taking charge of how to become a better citizen, forming part of society. Um, so, yeah, basically just focusing on your future without being narrow minded. Then we had a question pertaining to giving feedback and how it is a crucial component of learning and how it typically involves three key aspects. So basically, these have to do with telling a learner about a positive thing, then asking a question and then giving a suggestion, also regarded as the tag method, because also the sandwich method, by the way, because first you tell a student something they are doing positively, then you move on to something which can be improved upon, and finally you give a suggestion or mention something else which is positive so that the student is never demoralized. And if feedback is done so in this manner, it can be very valuable to anyone, and regardless of the subject they might be focusing on, they will still learn and grow as an individual as well. Then I had a question having to do with asking the class, do you understand, is widely considered ineffective. Why is this the case, and what alternative methods can teachers use to reliably check learners' understanding? And the one thing that is wrong with asking people, do you understand, is that it is way too much of a broad question. You are not being specific to what the students might need on an individual level. You are moving along way too quickly, and a method in which you can gather whether all students are on the same page is to perhaps use a mini whiteboard so that they all show you their answers simultaneously and you can point out who did not grasp the concept, or also a traffic light kind of method where students are given, for instance, three cups or three sheets of paper with a red color, an amber, or an orange color, and a yellow color, or a green color, just three different colors like a traffic light would be. And depending on their level of understanding, they show you um, the color. Red means they are not understanding at all. Orange or amber or yellow might mean that they partially understood but they need some more help to get there. And green means that they have fully understood the topic and they can move on as well. We had another question having to do with peer assessment and self-assessment as well. Peer assessment is where you use your own students as resources for each other. So for example, you get students to correct each other's work. So when you give them homework, for example, you prepare them in advance. You tell them that they are going to be correcting each other's work in class so that they take accountability of their own work and they do their work seriously because they do not want to look a clown in front of their peers in class. And self assessment is when you examine yourself, when you figure out what you are doing wrong and what you could improve, once again, taking charge of your own work and becoming less reliant, becoming less dependent on your educator, on your teacher as a learner, as a student in a secondary school or in literally any other regard. And these are um, two kinds of methods which we are encouraged to use very often within the classroom: peer assessment and self-assessment, and I used them during my teaching practice last year, and they proved to be very effective. I would definitely use them again this year during my teaching practice. And there were a few other things I brought up in my exam. For instance, having to do with multimodality to ensure that all students understand and are on the same page through using different modes of learning. For instance, a graphic novel might have visual means and textual means so that people who do not understand the text necessarily can use the pictures to understand better. But ultimately, the goal is to teach students how to learn to learn so that the learning becomes a lifelong situation rather than something that happens once and never happens again. That should never be the intention of a teacher. And ultimately the students should also be given a sheet with the success criteria so that they know what is expected of them and what they have to do so that they will no longer fear failure, because in schools, ultimately, and in any academic context, the goal of any educator should never be to fail a student or to be happy with the failure of any learner, but rather to help them learn on their own and to become aware of how lovely and beautiful learning and understanding a topic can be. And yeah, that is basically what the exam was about. And the assignment focused more on the language skills, speaking, listening, writing, and reading, rather than formative assessment and feedback necessarily. But it was a very good unit to follow at university. I think it was rather educational, with perhaps one of my best professors over there. Even though she can be quite hard on us, she does a very good job. But yeah, that is all I have to say with regard to my exam about feedback, language assessment, literacy, formative and summative assessment, that kind of stuff. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, comment, share, subscribe. Take a look at the rest of my content because why not? It's absolutely amazing. And I will see you in the next one, hopefully very, very soon. Thank you all for watching and bye guys.